Hi, I'm Greg Stanley. I'm here with Dr. Ron Peterson. Today we'd like to talk about what is a clinic administrator. It has different names, traditionally, office manager and so forth, but today we're going to give Whitehall's version, what we've learned, when to implement it, and maybe the scope of what somebody like this might do.
The typical general dentist business model is the single doctor. In a single doctor office, there are a limited number of operatories, usually between 3 and 5. There's a limited number of employees, a front desk, maybe 2, an assistant, maybe 2, and a hygienist, maybe 2. In fact, in that business model, it is extremely profitable by percentage of money collected because the overhead costs are controlled so well. But there comes a time when that model may not work so well, such as when the doctor gets tired, wants to take more time off, has grown to the point where he or she can no longer do all of the things that are being demanded, and it requires more staff and perhaps an associate doctor joining the practice. At that point, you can easily lose control. A business manager may or may not have even existed in the office prior to, and you may not have even had job descriptions because there are so few employees that if someone isn't doing their job, everybody else is going to know it just automatically because things aren't getting done. But as the number of employees grow and there are new people coming into the office, not just employees, but doctors, that all changes because now there's lots of people and the control of the office can easily slip away and deteriorate into a state of chaos. So what we're looking at is how do you stop that from happening? How do you keep control of your office? How do you make the office run as smoothly when you're not there as when you are there? And that's the key. It's one office, it's one set of systems, protocols, and activities regardless of who is in the office that day. So that's what we're going to talk about. And the key person to this is what we call the clinical administrator. The clinical administrator allows each person in the office to work at their highest and best level. For example, the most valuable thing in a doctor's office or a dental office is the doctor's time. The most expensive thing is a chair with nobody in it. So using the doctor's time to its highest value means the doctor shouldn't be running the office, the doctor should be doing dentistry. If the doctor's not controlling things, then who is? A clinical administrator is the solution that we recommend. So the question is, okay, what is a clinical administrator and what do they do? Well, the clinical administrator essentially functions as the CEO of the dental practice. And the CEO is at the top of the pyramid of the employees. She is right below what would be the board of directors in most corporate structure, and the board of directors in a dental office is the owner or the owners. Underneath the clinical administrator are leaders that represent the major teams in the office. In most instances, that will be a front desk team leader, a clinical or assisting team leader, and a hygiene team leader. Now, in smaller offices as they're growing, one person may fill 2 of these roles. For example, the clinical administrator may also be the front desk team leader, and the back office may be combined so that the back office team leader is both representing hygiene and assisting. But as you grow, you'll need them for each of those divisions. So the clinical team leader and her duties, she works with the other team leaders and heads what we call the executive team. These are the managers of the entire office. The team and the CA, the clinical administrator, do a number of things for the office. Some are day-to-day, some are much longer. It can include setting goals, it can also include long-term goals, but we'll get more into that. To begin with, she's the person that sets and enforces rules and protocols. So she's the one that is certain and watches to be sure that people are doing the things they're supposed to be doing, completing the duties they have been assigned, and following all the scripts, protocols, and systems that the office has implemented. Day-to-day making sure that patient flow is running the way it should, that phones are being answered the way they should, that patients are getting the experience that you want them to have when they come to your office. So she oversees all this. Now, obviously, she works with her team, and the team leaders know what they should be watching on a day-to-day basis and patient to patient. So the leaders are the people that keep things running smoothly and keep the wheels turning the way they should. This executive team will set goals for daily and monthly production. And we're going to talk about that in the next session. But the way this happens is through working with the owner and determining what reasonable goals are for the next 6 months, for the next year, for this month. What kind of growth are we in? How can we increase it? And what kinds of goals are reasonable? These goals are serious. We will certainly judge the performance of the leader and her team leaders by how well they set those goals and how well they perform and make them.
One of the things that goes into the patient flow, number of new patients, patients through the office, we know from long experience that should yield a certain amount of dentistry. So if you're well below that, then you haven't set your goals high enough, or you don't have the rules and systems in place to hit those goals.
Correct. And if those systems are weak, they're not getting the performance that we expect, then we're going to take a hard look at those systems and see what's wrong with them.
Right.
Part of consulting is looking at every possible interaction between a staff person and a patient or customer. What do you want to have happen during that interaction? How can you improve what's happening now, and how can you improve it a lot? So that starts with the initial phone call and goes all the way through every interaction that new patient has with a staff member. So those are the things that the CA will oversee, the team leaders will oversee, and make sure they're being accomplished. They set goals for the future working with the team and the doctor. You can have reasonable goals and unreasonable goals. We've seen offices that think they should grow 20% a month. That can happen for a couple months, but it's not going to happen for 3 years, at least highly unlikely. And that's kind of unreasonable. But more often than not, we see offices set goals kind of low. And staff, in many cases, is more optimistic about what they think can be accomplished than the doctor may be. So we'll help guide that. This is important, and this can be done at a special meeting time. You should have specific times where you meet with your leaders and specifically your CA to work these things out where you won't be interrupted. And we're going to talk about meetings a little more.
Just a thought on this. To not know performance norms or expectations, you might bring an associate on, and that person, in effect, is losing money for the practice. And if you don't know what to expect, you can talk yourself into thinking this needs to probably go on like this for 6 or 8 or 10 months, or maybe it takes a year to make money. It's really not true. You need to know that a clinic run right, with the right goals based on the patient flow and so forth, that associate should be making money very shortly.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that team leaders and clinical administrators can oversee. Once they know the expectations and they know what to expect from their associates, how do you determine, is this a good associate that just needs coaching and upgrading, or is this someone who's just never going to cut it?
Just a side note on that. A clinic administrator, a team leader who can't talk frankly with an associate doctor probably isn't much good, because the associate, you could say, outranks them. And so the associate's underperforming, and the staff person basically is really helpless. They need to feel like they really can, as you said, coach them to success.
That is correct, and you hit on another point, and that is selecting the right person. And we'll get into that just a little bit when we get a little further on and talk about some of the duties with hiring and firing. Setting goals for the future, very important. You should always have goals. Now, we can have incredibly unanticipated problems that arise, such as our recent COVID debacle, and those are beyond anybody's total control. However, it's interesting to see how a number of offices have done just fine, have either met or come close to meeting last year's performance, the previous years, and some have actually even exceeded it. And it's for a number of reasons, but leadership is a big part of that. After the goals are set, the CA and her leaders need to delegate duties to other people as appropriate. And in some cases, this will be to other members of the executive team, and in some cases, it may be to staff people within those teams. However it's done, it has to be followed, it has to be watched. So delegating duties is very appropriate. The CA can't do everything, but she can lead the orchestra and make sure everybody's playing the right notes and doing their part. We mentioned a little bit about meetings. People hate meetings, everybody hates meetings, but they're crucial to long-term success of any business. The clinical administrator will be the person who arranges and leads meetings. And these will begin with the owner or owners, because as the CEO, she reports to the board of directors. So at these meetings, which should be very regularly, perhaps once a week, or at least once every 2 weeks, so she can bring the board of directors up to speed on everything that's happening in the office. It doesn't mean she goes in with a bunch of problems and says, "Help, what should I do?" She should go in and report on the important issues that have arisen, and in some cases that she's already taken care of and they're fixed, but the owners need to know about it, and in some cases asking for some guidance from the boards of directors.
They will appreciate it if you give them choices, meaning a couple of solutions, and maybe they can decide on one.
Yes, absolutely. And remember, the owners have the ability to overturn any decision, right or wrong. So remember, we all work for the owners and the board of directors, but the clinical administrator needs to be a strong person, present things well, and come in with the appropriate attitude on anything that she presents to the owner.
And one of the things we don't like to see is a leader continually going to owners to get solutions, feedback, input on all these things, because it kills her accountability. She's no longer accountable. It's like accountability slides back and forth between her shoulders and the shoulders of the owner doctor. It's best that it's rare that the owner doctor steps in so that the leader is continually accountable.
Correct. She should also have meetings with the other leaders, because this is the executive team and you work together as a team. I've heard the analogy of different types of teams. Think of this, in which team you'd rather belong to, relating it to how a business operates. A basketball team depends upon 5 people working together. Everybody would love to have a Michael Jordan, but even Michael Jordan has to have somebody throw the ball to him, and there have to be people that play defense. So a basketball team has strategies, they have positions, and they know what they're doing, and they work together as a team. Now compare that to a golf team in high school or college. Every golfer goes out individually, gets his score, and at the end of the round, they add up the scores and compare them, and then they see which team won based upon individual effort, not upon the effort of the team itself. So which one works better in business? It's, I think, pretty simple. It's the basketball team. You've got to have everybody that works together, understands what they're doing, how it's working, where their problems are, and they work on solutions together.
So we're counting on this leader to make sure everybody does their part, as opposed to, like you said, throwing the ball to Michael Jordan. Everybody gives it all they've got, as opposed to counting on 1 or 2 superstars.
Correct. The leaders should talk about all the issues in the office and should resolve them. And then that may be reported by the clinical administrator to the owners in the future, or may not. If they're planning strategies, of course that will be reported, but corrective issues that are being resolved in the office, they don't have to take long, boring reports up through the leaders to the owner, unless it gets very serious and they need to know that we have to let this person go or we're getting close to that. That's a different story. With the entire office, it's important the office knows what's going on. These can be training sessions, these can be informative, these can be surveys, all sorts of different things to keep the entire office staff involved with what's happening in the office. One hint here, these meetings should not be run by the doctor. Doctors really, frankly, aren't that good at running these kinds of meetings because they really haven't gotten trained in it, and CAs will be good. Doctors should be called upon to give reports as needed, as wanted, but don't let them take over. Typically, with most office meetings, you could almost tape it and replay it once every 2 months because you get the same things that happen and the same outcome. It starts a little late because a few people can't make it right on time at their lunch hour when a lot of people have their meetings. Everybody eats, it gets started late, you hardly get going, and then patients start showing up early, people have to leave. It's a mess. And they typically deteriorate into complaint sessions. So having an agenda for every meeting, keeping notes, having duties assigned, that's very important if you're going to move forward and not just have a repeat of last month's gripe session. And that needs to fall also upon the clinical administrator. So there should be a meeting agenda. It should follow a structured pattern. There should be, or could be, assignments at the end of it, and those come out in writing, and the notes are distributed after the meeting. With outside vendors, there will be some instances where vendors may have something interesting to talk about. So this can be screened by the clinical administrator. And if she thinks it's good, or she and one of the team leaders from the appropriate department think it's good, take it to the doctor. Knowing how this operates as a doctor, these calls come in every single day, sometimes several times a day. And honestly, remember, the most important and valuable thing in your office is the doctor's time. So do you really want to put them on the phone with a vendor who's selling something that may be a total waste of time? So screening and doing outside meetings often can be part of it. The clinical administrator hires, fires, and inspires. She usually conducts at least the first round of hiring interviews, and these are typically on the phone, and then may even come into office interview in the next round. But typically she starts it, either she or the team leader for that appropriate department. But she gets involved in that decision making all the way through. She's also trained in what she can say and what she can't say, how to keep you from being sued, how to avoid any inappropriate questions, and how to conduct a legal, defensible interview. She hires staff and, in some cases, associate doctors. To do this, she has to know what she's talking about. And just a hint here, we ask that the clinical administrator conduct at least the first round of interviews with an associate doctor for a couple of reasons. One is to see how the associate doctor responds to that. If the potential associate says, "Hey, I don't want to talk to you, I only want to talk to the doctor. Who are you? Get me in with the big guy." That's showing you that he really doesn't respect who you are and what your job is. And this gives you certainly the opportunity to make that point. And you'll be able to pick up some other interesting things, perhaps, based upon any comments. So you should start. You establish yourself as the leader of the office. And in fact, they don't know this, but you, when it gets down to it, really have the power to even let them go. You would do that, of course, with working with the doctor. But many times doctors don't know what's going on because their staff isn't informing them. So You and your leaders and your staff need to know what to expect from your associate, and the associate needs to know where they fit in the leadership ladder, and that is underneath the team leader for the back office. So, highly respected employee, highly valuable employee, but the associate doctor is not just one step below the owner doctor and above the clinical administrator. He or she is a part of the restorative team. The clinical administrator and her team leaders are also the people who discipline staff when necessary. These are not individuals that we want as leaders to be dictators, to be unreasonable, to be bosses. Anybody can be a boss. It's hard to be a leader. But sometimes people do need discipline. So they need to know how to do it legally. It's essentially a 3-step process, 3 strikes and you're out. But there are legal necessities that have to take place during those steps, and your leaders need to know that, so that if someone does threaten to take you to a labor board or a lawsuit, you have a strong defense. And that can happen. In fact, I'm really kind of believing anymore that as a doctor, a physician, or a dentist, you have a greater possibility of being sued by a disgruntled employee than you do from a disgruntled patient. The rewards are bigger and the outcomes are more unpredictable.
I don't think it's insured either.
In some places, it can be as a rider. So if you're listening to this, check it out. If you can get a rider on your insurance that will cover disgruntled staff, do it, because it will save you a lot of grief and a lot of money. But be also advised that it will not cover you for things like sexual harassment or illegal activities. Your leaders, your CA in particular, need to be familiar with federal and state employment laws, and they should also have a office manual that is continuously up to date on all of these issues. And probably most important, sets a positive example for everyone in the office. People should look at your clinical administrator and say, wow, she's great. I really would like to be like that. That's an inspiration. That's the kind of person you want. She also, along with the leaders, protect the office culture. What does that mean? She knows the value of healthy culture and the dangers of disruptive elements in your office. Your culture is everything that goes on in the office. It's how you treat your patients. It's how you treat each other. It's how you respect the rules of the office. Do you come in late? Do you leave early? Do you steal? Obviously, those are quite, well, not exaggerated, but those are kind of borderline out there issues. But some people let that happen, and they ignore it. And that is an unhealthy culture. A healthy culture should be people who like their job. In fact, if they get fulfillment from it, that is about as high as you can be. And in healthcare, that should include altruism. Anybody who's only in it for the money or just get me in here, get me out of here, I'm getting tired of these people, they don't belong in healthcare. They belong in something else.
Let's talk a little more about culture.
Okay?
Toxic culture. To me, one of the worst cultures I've seen. And the doctor has a tendency to not see it as toxic. They try to be nice to everyone, nice to the staff, nice to the underperforming employees, in hopes that being nice to them will cause them to step up. And then after being nice for a long time, almost without warning, they want them gone. It creates kind of a toxic feeling, like you'll never see it coming here. So part of a healthy culture is really knowing where you stand at all times. And so that's really good to keep in mind.
The truth is always the way to go. Someone who is underperforming needs to be talked to. You need to determine, if possible, why they're underperforming. Mm-hmm. Are they just not interested, or are they just developing more slowly? Because you have a decision to make. And these decisions affect people's lives, and you have to, as leaders, be able to defend the decision that you make. So This is the psychology part of it. This is the part about being a good person, meaning an intelligent person that accesses and assesses all the information possible and then makes an appropriate decision in conjunction with the appropriate other leaders.
A lot of times the leader, the clinic administrator, has a pretty tough job in that, and I'm talking about the best of the best. The doctor comes in, has had a bad time at home, something's wrong, got hit by the IRS, something, and he comes in and he's got a bad attitude. She doesn't pass that on to her team. She gives them the same support, nurturing that she always does, and she basically takes the hit from the owner doctor. And she can't keep doing it indefinitely, but that's just one example of a real highly evolved leader in my mind.
And even building on that, a strong, highly developed leader will confront the doctor in a situation like that and say, what's going on? Because if you behave the way you're acting now, there's going to be chaos all day long. And that takes a lot of guts to do that. But that's what your job is. And frankly, that's what's best for the office. Because at this point, you're not the doctor's personal assistant. You are the clinical administrator of the office. So in a nutshell, you're responsible for everything. Because you're the person at the top of the pyramid. You're the person who is the CEO. And you have to want to do this. This is not a job you should take lightly, and it's not one you should offer to someone if they don't want to do it. You don't want, as a doctor, to talk somebody into this and say, oh, I know you can do it. You can handle this. And if the employee says, I really don't want to do this, and you talk them into it, 6 months from now when everything is underperforming and we ask why and you ask why, her answer will be, I didn't want this job in the first place. So it has to be mutual. You have to want the person, trust that person, believe in that person, because you got to have their back. You cannot undermine this person. You can't be the old mom and dad thing where the kid asks, Mom, can I go do this? And she says no, so you run to Dad. Dad says, sure, go ahead. You can't have that kind of a situation in the office leadership. So why would you ever do this? Well, for rewards. And the rewards are really good pay, typically tied with performance bonuses. But above that, it's because it's the kind of thing you like to do. You like to build things. You like to see things excel. You like to see success, and you like to be part of it. In other words, ownership. You feel like you own it, and you will perform, and it will happen.
If you only want people to like you, if that's all you want, it's probably not going to be good.
Absolutely. Greg, thank you. Our next lesson will be on key performance indicators, what they are, how to measure them, how to keep track of them. So we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.